I certainly feel that we are closer to establishing fair recruitment more than ever before. And that's not just because we have instruments and tools that can guide us into that direction, but because more and more the stakeholders are coming together to understand that fair migration cannot be sustainable, cannot happen. Markets cannot be satisfied unless there's more fair working conditions granted to workers. And the dialogue that has been established a few years ago, and which is really leading to very good instruments and commitment by different stakeholders, employers, recruitment agencies, countries of destination and countries of origin, who are now bringing fair recruitment into the heart of their bilateral negotiations, trade unions in destination and in countries of origin as well. So the notion of fair recruitment is more and more becoming kind of accessible to more people. Now the challenge is, okay, we know that this is what it takes for fair recruitment to happen. Are we willing to make it happen? Because there might be a cost at the beginning, and the cost is obviously sometimes financial or perhaps a bit more procedures. So this is where it is very important to try to identify champions who are taking steps to commit to fair recruitment and showcase that it can actually work, that they are sustaining their businesses, that employers are retaining their workers, that governments are more satisfied with the way the labor market is operating while granting rights to migrant workers. Challenges are there, yes, but we know more about them, and this is also, perhaps I'm talking positively, but understanding the challenge make it possible to address it. So part of the challenges is that the recruitment fees. Who is going to pay the recruitment fees? Is it fair or not for workers to pay recruitment fees? What does it mean when a worker enters into that bondage because of recruitment fees before they go travel and engage in an employment relationship? So the question of fees remains kind of a hot potato, but again, there is a discussion around it. Another thing is to what extent are consumers aware of fair and ethical recruitment, of understand the supply chain and their own responsibility, and to what extent are they willing to sacrifice their own pleasure to do the right thing. It's not just about knowing the right thing, but it's also having kind of the government stepping in with enforcement mechanism, with monitoring tools. And all of this requires resources, requires time, requires willingness. The challenge is to align the different needs and more identify successful models and try to promote them and replicate them.
I think the several principal obstacles to achieving the main goal in our concern for recruitment, which is to stop workers from paying for the jobs that they're offered in the recruitment process. It sounds quite simple to get workers to stop paying, but it isn't that simple. Because of the desperation of so many workers in Asian countries and African countries who are really desperate for work, and so who are prepared and expect to pay for the jobs that they're offered in other countries. Along with the kinds of money that they're paying for these jobs, that feeds a whole system of corruption, of bribery and exaction and extortion that comes from these monies. So there is tremendous resistance to the principle of the employer only pays. I say employer only because we know that even if employers pay all the recruitment costs for migrant workers, private recruitment agencies in countries of origin can still charge workers because they expect to pay. So there are these kinds of dilemmas in practice that go on despite legislation, policies, regulations that are opposed to the worker pays principle of recruitment. So legislation is important, and one of the dilemmas in the industry is that countries of origin, labour countries of origin, are still allowing recruitment agencies to charge workers, even though these amounts are capped to 1 month, 2 months, 3 months salary. It's the thin edge of the wedge, in the sense that they are allowed to charge them, but they charge them far more than what the law allows. That's where the expectations to pay something is maintained and reproduced, and that's a problem. They should repeal those laws, but it doesn't look like they're going to do that at this point, and I can't see any serious movements or pressure for countries of origin to do that yet. There are increasing bilateral agreements. We're waiting to see if those measures are going to really be fruitful, and other measures that are being taken, for example, the UAE and now Qatar setting up visa offices in countries of origin to simplify the procedures and to provide safeguards against contract substitution, for example. But we still need to see whether the issue of workers paying is going to continue or not. Those are some of the issues. I think that the other issues are a general concern to make ethical employers, agencies, employees, governments, to try to get a sense in which all the players, all the stakeholders in recruitment are trustworthy. And this is a dilemma. So there are proposals for accreditation programs for recruitment agencies so that they get certified as being ethical recruitment agencies. That's not being done for employers, for example. So we need to see more from the employer side, I think, in terms of those personnel in the employing companies who receive kickback payments, which are all illegal, but who receive those monies, and it's very, very lucrative for them. So we can expect resistance because of the large amounts of money through these corrupt practices of kickback, bribery and so on. We can expect resistance because people who are receiving these monies and companies who are gaining from not paying recruitment costs, it's in their financial interests. So we need to be mindful and careful in how we bring about changes and who we target for those changes.
I believe all stakeholders have a shared interest in fair recruitment. The employers need to ensure fair recruitment to make sure skills matching of the workers that will optimize the workers' performance, that will benefit their business sustainability, as well as for the private employment agencies that assisting them in recruiting the workers. For the governments, they need to ensure fair recruitment for all their citizens in general. And in the case of migrant workers, we see already how high the dependency of the origin countries to the remittance coming from their migrant workers to the national economic development. And for the workers, fair recruitment is the right for all workers. And now the biggest challenge will be how to ensure all these different stakeholders are on the same page in terms of understanding of the definitions of the fair recruitment, as well as the actions required to achieve it. The key is to make sure that social dialogue is well implemented in regulating recruitment and strengthening its enforcement by an inclusive monitoring process, by prioritizing workers' voice as the most vulnerable party in recruitment industry.
Well, one of the main challenges for us is really having the right regulatory framework to operate. Employers need skills. They need skills to run their businesses, to run their operations, and skills are not available always at home. So there's a shortage of talent, there's a shortage of skills for employers wherever they are, being in sending countries, countries of destination, countries of origin, and that's why we need to ensure that the employers have access to these skills, being at a higher skill level or even at the lower skill level. What we see is that governments have the regulatory framework in place. Most of the governments have the regulatory framework in place to ensure that companies can hire and move the skills around. However, when we look at the lower skill spectrum, the regulatory framework are lacking or missing or incomplete, or the implementation of the regulations is just lacking. So for businesses, it's really difficult to work in those in that environment where enforcement is lacking.
What I think is needed is for social partners to get together on the national level and ratify and implement Convention 181 on private employment agencies. The ILO has created a great instrument to create social dialogue on the national level and to create a regulatory framework that balances the interest of job seekers, workers, employers and government in creating the regulatory framework that is needed to create an environment for fair and ethical recruitment, regardless of whether that recruitment is domestic within that jurisdiction or across borders to another country. And that's where it starts with. It's creating that rule of law and that appropriate regulatory framework that balances the interest of workers, businesses and government in employment services.
Sure. I mean, I guess there's on the one hand thematic challenges and on the other maybe more process challenges. Certainly from a thematic point of view, issues like the recruitment fees and costs that are charged to workers represent a huge hurdle or challenge in this overall context. Likewise, things like passport retention, deception in the recruitment process where workers are told they're going into one position or job in one place and that's not what they find when they arrive in the destination country. There are those sorts of issues. And then on the other hand, there are challenges in terms of the complexity of the labor supply chains, for example. I think in our case, what we see in the global supply chains, the number of recruitment agencies and sub-agents that are involved in the recruitment process can sometimes be very high. So migrants themselves moving, let's say, from a community of origin, maybe in the provinces, through the capital city to a country of destination, they pass through a series of hands or agents and sub-agents. That whole process can be quite complex and there's potential for abuse at many of those different stages. For companies who are trying to look at this in the supply chain context, they often have very little visibility over that process. For them, it's very, very hard to track that and understand the number of steps that migrants have gone through. So being able to shine a light on that process is very important for them, to track what's happened along that chain and to then be able to take the steps to remedy any problems or abuses that have taken place along that is something very important. But the first step is to highlight or to shine a spotlight on that process itself. So I think that's, for many companies, a very big challenge.
And one of the integral element of fair recruitment is really the standard that migrant workers should not be paying recruitment fees. And in that aspect alone, there are so many challenges already. Just one of the standards in the Fair Recruitment Principles is really fraught with a lot of challenges. One of them is how this whole business was set up. You have the corruption in this business. It's really a huge barrier for implementing fair recruitment standards. When we talk to recruitment agencies and when we do the mapping in different corridors, in different industries, we hear one consistent narrative that they have to buy the job orders from employers or destination country recruitment agencies, or they have to pay the government to facilitate documentation, or in any part of that process, some bribes are being paid. Now, if we don't eliminate that, there will always be the risk that ethical recruiters will be undercut by recruiters who are willing to pay. And that brings us to another challenge, which is really that it's so hard or difficult to find an ethical recruiter, only because most of them have set up their business models in a way of that they can buy their way into the recruitment business. The anecdotal comments from the stakeholders we talked to, including private recruitment agencies, is that it's easier to set up a new agency rather than convert an old one. It's easier to start fresh with the ethical recruitment standards than change an old system. And that might be true in a way, and there's always a challenge whereby agencies operate in a dichotomized business, with dichotomized business models, one that is fee charging and one that is non-fee charging, because there's a risk with low volume that ethical recruitment is actually being subsidized by the unethical part of the business. So we don't want that to happen. That's why the initiatives around having a mechanism to identify who the ethical recruiters are and matching them with ethical employers is really very important. For example, one of the initiatives around this is the accredited certification system like On the Level or IRIS. With On the Level, the standards, they've defined the standards, and that includes capacity building to really have more ethical recruiters who will be able to work under this space and work with an ethical employer.